Good morning, children. Today we are here to discuss the poem The Road Not Taken, which is there in your Beehive book. The Road Not Taken is one of the finest poems composed by Robert Frost. This poem has a deep meaning which deals with the problem of making a right choice. The poet says that the path that we don't choose in our life is the road not taken. He describes his feelings about the choice that he had left in the past. The path we choose decides our future, our destination. Now, as you can see, there are 4 stanzas in the poem. So, we shall discuss each stanza one by one and try to know the meaning of the stanzas. Now let's move to the very first stanza of the poem. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveller, long I stood and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. In the very first stanza of the poem, the poet says that once he was walking down a road and there was a diversion. There were 2 different paths and he had to choose one out of 2. The poet says that as he was one person, he could not travel on both the roads. He says that he feels sorry for not choosing both the roads, and he had to choose one out of 2 roads. Now in the very first stanza, as you can see, yellow wood. So yellow wood means a forest with leaves which have turned yellow in color and are wearing out. This shows that it could be the season of autumn. The poet kept standing there and looked at the path very carefully, as far as he could see. Before taking the path, he wanted to know whether the path was suitable for him or not. So, it happens in our life also. When we have many choices in our life, we have to choose only one out of them. We take time to think about the pros and cons, whether it is suitable for us or not. And only then we take a decision that which path should we choose. And let's come to the second stanza of the poem. Then took the other just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that the passing there had warned them really about the same. In the second stanza of the poem, the poet kept on looking at one path for a long time. Now, why was he looking? Why did he keep looking at one path? He kept looking at one path for a long time to check if it was the right path for him or not. And then he decided and started walking on another path, because he felt that both the paths were equally good. Now here the poet says, just as fair. Just as fair, because he felt that both the paths were equally good, and then started walking on one of them. He adds that the path was better for him as it had grass, which means that it was less traveled. Now, after he had walked on the path for some distance, he realized that both the paths were similar. How both the paths were similar? As travelers have passed through them. Now, even in our life also, we have so many choices, but we have to choose any one of them. So we need to choose them very carefully. And even if we have chosen one of them, even if we have taken any one path out of many, then they all have the same benefits, disadvantages, problems, challenges, and we must face them positively. Now let's come to the third stanza of the poem. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. In the third stanza of the poem, the poet says that both the paths were similar that morning. Okay, both had leaves on them. Now, how come the poet says that both had leaves on them? As they were still green in color, and he decided that day that he would take one path and keep the other path for another day. Although he knew that he could not go back on the choice that he had made. However, it seems in this stanza that the poet regrets his decision slightly, wondering if he will ever get to come back and take the other road. Now, the last stanza of the poem. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. Now, in the last stanza of the poem, the poet says that in the future, we will take a deep breath and say that once upon a time, he had reached such a point in his life that there were two options for him, and he travelled on that road which had been less travelled upon. That decision of poet decided his future. In other words, the poet feels that he will look back and then decide whether the choice he has made was the correct one or not, as a future depends on the choice which we make in our life. So the poet has tried to give a message through this poem that the choice we make in our life has an impact on our future. If we make a wrong choice, we regret it and cannot undo the things to make it right. So we must be careful, we must be wise while making choice. So I hope the meaning of the poem is clear to you, and now you need to answer certain given questions. Thank you. Hello children. So in the previous video we had discussed the summary of this poem, The Road Not Taken. Now in this video we shall discuss the poetic device of The Road Not Taken. Now, as you can see, there are 4 stanzas in this poem. So first let us focus on the rhyme scheme of the poem. The rhyme scheme of the poem, The Road Not Taken, is A, B, A, B. Let us find out how is this rhyme scheme possible. So let us see the last word of each line of the first stanza. Would, both, stood, could, undergrowth. Now wood, we shall mark wood as A. Now let's see that if wood is rhyming with both or not. Now you can clearly see that wood is not rhyming with both, so we'll mark both as B. Now let's see the third word, that is stood. Stood is rhyming with wood, so we'll mark it as A. Again, stood is rhyming with could, so again we'll mark it as A. Undergrowth is rhyming with both, so we'll mark it as B. So the rhyming scheme of the very first stanza is A, B, A, B. Now let us focus on the rhyming scheme of the second stanza. Fair, claim, where, there, same. Now let us mark fair as A, claim as B, as it's not rhyming with fair. Now let us mark where as A, as it's rhyming with fair. Again, there is rhyming with where, so again we'll mark there as A. Claim is rhyming with, same is rhyming with claim, so we'll mark it as B. So again in the second stanza we have the rhyming scheme A, B, A, B. Now let's see to the second stanza of the poem. Lay, black, day, way, back. Lay is rhyming with day, so we'll mark it as A. Again, day is rhyming with way, so again we'll mark it as A. Black is rhyming with back, so we'll mark it as B, B. So the rhyming scheme of the third stanza is A, B, A, B. Now let's see to the last stanza of the poem. Sigh, hence, I, by, difference. Sigh is rhyming with I, so we'll mark it as A. Hence, it's also rhyming with by, so again we'll mark it as A. Hence is rhyming with difference, so we'll mark it as B. So can you see that the rhyming scheme of each stanza is the same, that is A, B, A, B. This is the first point. Now let us move to the second point, that is let us talk about now metaphor. So what is metaphor? Metaphor is a literary device in which we compare two things or two ideas without using the word like or as. So let's see here, roads have been compared to choices. They have been compared to choices in a life. And again, if you find, then forest has been compared to our life. Okay? Then let's move to the second poetic device, that is alliteration. Now what is alliteration? Alliteration is repetition of consonant sound. Okay, so let's see in the very first stanza if we can find any example of alliteration. So yes, we have second stanza. So let's see in the second stanza. First stanza we could not get any example of alliteration. Let's see in the second stanza. Wanted, where, were. So it's the sound of W coming out of these two words. So this is the example of alliteration. Now let's see if in another stanza, that is stanza number 3, if we have any example of alliteration. I forgot to mention, we have one more example of alliteration, that is though, that, the, there. This is another example of alliteration in stanza number 2. Now let's move to another poetic device, that is anaphora. Now anaphora is something like when two or more lines begin with the same word, then that is an example of anaphora. For example, you can see in the very first stanza, and sorry, I could not travel both, and be one traveler, and look down one. So this is an example of anaphora. Clear? I hope you are understanding. Now let's move to another literary device in the poem, that is repetition. Now what is repetition, children? Repetition is a poetic device, or you can say literary device, in which the same word has been repeated. Okay, so let's see if we have an example of repetition in this poem or not. Yes, we do have example of repetition in this poem. Let's come to the last stanza, that is ages and ages. So in ages and ages, you can clearly see that ages has been repeated twice. So this is an example of repetition. Clear? Now let's move to another poetic device, that is personification. Now what is personification? Personification is that literary device in which we consider any living thing, any non-living thing as a person. For example, let's see in the second stanza, then look the other just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Now we are talking about the road. Since road is non-living thing, it won't want wear. So here it has been referred to road, and road has been considered as human. Okay, so this is an example of personification. Road has been personified in the second stanza. Now let's move to the next poetic device, that is simile. Now what is simile? Simile is that poetic device in which there is comparison between two things using like or as. So you can clearly see just as fair. So just as fair is an example of simile, as both the roads have been compared to each other. Okay, so this was all, these were the examples, or these were the poetic devices in the poem Road Not Taken. I hope you might have understood it very well. Thank you so much.